Chapter 15. When Elder Thomas and Elder Taylor returned to their apartment in Heidelberg, they found what Elder Thomas had been fearing for days: a telegram. Elder Thomas felt the breath go out of him. "Leave for Holland immediately," the telegram said. "Turn over all church records to local leaders. Contact the mission office before you leave." It was August 25th, 1941. Hitler had moved his troops to the borders of Poland, and everyone knew that war would begin any day now. Elder Taylor had only served for a short time, and already his mission, at least in Germany, was over. Getting train tickets was a problem. Trains were being taken over by troops as the army mobilized. The train schedule was tentative, and according to railroad officials, unpredictable from this point on. Finally, the man in the ticket booth said, "I can sell you tickets for Frankfurt, leaving early in the morning. From there, you will have to see what you can do." Elder Thomas had known that he might pass through Frankfurt, the next big city to the north, and that would bring him tantalizingly close to the Stoltzes, but he saw no way that he could take time to visit them. That evening, the elders took much of what they owned to members: bicycles, books, household items, and then they packed their trunks late that night. After, they lay on their coverless mattresses and tried to sleep in the oppressive, humid heat. Neither slept much at all, and they were up before sunrise. The train ride should have lasted a couple of hours, but it took 4, with a long delay in Mannheim. The elders wondered whether they might be forced off, but they pushed themselves into a corner and tried to remain inconspicuous. At the Frankfurt train station, the elders were able to get their trunks off the train, but they needed to pack what they could in suitcases. The trunks were too bulky. Suddenly, Elder Thomas realized that he had an excuse. "The Stoltzes can help us," Elder Thomas said. "I want to talk to them anyway. I want to see whether Brother Stoltz isn't ready to be baptized." They carried their trunks outside, but they found a taxi hard to procure. Finally, they spotted one arriving and ran to the driver before he had opened the door. They offered him a high price if he could get them to the Stoltzes' apartment. When Elder Thomas knocked on the door, he was hoping that everyone would be home on a Saturday morning, but Sister Stoltz was the one who appeared at the door. She took a moment to accept the shock and then grabbed Elder Thomas and hugged him. "Oh, my," she said when she finally calmed down. "The others are not here. They will want to see you." "What time do they come home?" "Early on Saturdays. Anna comes home from work at noon. Heinrich and Peter will get home from school a little later." "But you must stay until they come. Absolutely." Elder Thomas looked at his watch. It was after 11. Now that he had come this far, he had to talk to Brother Stoltz. It was his last missionary effort, and he couldn't leave until he had carried it out. And so the elders carried their trunks upstairs, and they went out to buy suitcases. And then they walked to the post office where they called President Wood. "We're in Frankfurt. We couldn't get tickets to Holland," he told the president. "Can anyone help us?" "No. Buy tickets for Amsterdam, but you'll need tickets on to London by ship. We just got a call from the border. If you can't prove you're continuing on through, the Dutch border guards won't let you in. Do you have enough money to do that?" "I think so. We can't take any with us, can we?" "Only a little. You might give some to members if you want, but I would keep a reserve. You'll need to eat, and the way the trains are jammed, it could take a day or two to get out." "President, do you know the Stoltz family here in Frankfurt?" "Yes, of course." "Before we go, I want to talk to Brother Stoltz and see whether he's willing to be baptized." "You'd better not take time for that. If you can get out, just go." "Are all the missionaries gone from Frankfurt?" "No, we're trying to close out the office. We have a million things to do, and Sister Wood is trying to finish up some lesson materials the members can use. But we're hoping to leave by tomorrow, or maybe the next day." Elder Thomas wondered. If the president's missionary work could keep him another day, maybe his own work could too. Still, he knew what he had to do. He had to obey his mission president. And so the elders walked to the train station, and they stood in a long line. But the harried clerk was not a lot of help. There were no tickets available on any train leaving Frankfurt that afternoon or evening. Finally, he said that he could sell them tickets all the way to Amsterdam on a train leaving the next morning, but he couldn't guarantee that the schedule would hold overnight. Elder Thomas was too elated to worry about that. He had his answer. Now he had to stay. And so the elders hurried back to the Stoltzes, and they repacked their bags, leaving behind all sorts of things for Sister Stoltz to keep, or to pass on to other church members. Elder Thomas was on his knees in the living room, packing, when the door opened and Anna stepped in. She looked tired but beautiful. She didn't say anything, but Elder Thomas saw her swallow, as though she were trying to find her voice. "Guten Tag," Elder Thomas said, trying to sound casual about being there. He stood up. "What?" But she didn't finish. "We're leaving Germany," Elder Thomas said. "I know, we heard, but I didn't expect you here." "We're leaving our trunks behind." It wasn't much of an explanation, but he didn't want to go through the whole story. "How long will you be here?" "We leave in the morning. Elder Thomas finally thought of his companion. "This is Bruder Taylor," he said. Elder Taylor shook her hand. "It pleases me," he said softly. Sister Stoltz had come into the room now. "Isn't this wonderful?" she said, and she walked to Anna and put her arm around her waist. And then she added, "I'm preparing something to eat. Anna, you keep them company until it's ready." Anna nodded, and then she sat down on the couch. Elder Thomas knelt by his suitcase again, but he kept looking at her. "Where are you going?" she asked them. "To the Netherlands, and then, I don't know." "Bruder Mize told us the last time you went to the Netherlands you came back, after 3 weeks." "Yes, but it won't happen that way again. President Wood said we won't be back." She nodded, and he saw the sadness in her eyes. "It will be nice for you to see your family." "We may not go home. We may finish our mission somewhere else. No one knows for sure." Elder Thomas looked down at the things in his trunk, but he couldn't think what to do with anything. All his concentration was gone. "How's the branch doing?" he asked. "Good. Everyone is kind to us. I teach the small children in primary. Mother teaches the older ones." "That's good, Anna. What about your father? Does he go with you?" "Yes, every week." Elder Thomas finally heard some animation in her voice. He looked up again. "That's what I was hoping. Do you think he'll ever join the church?" "I think he wants to. He's never quite certain. You should talk to him while you're here." "I plan to." Elder Thomas looked down again. She had begun to smile, to accept the joy of the moment, however brief. "Does anyone know anything about Bruder Goldfarb?" Elder Thomas asked. "No one can contact him directly, but President Mize gets reports from someone. All we hear is that he is still there in his shop, alone. I wish I could go there today. If it were only dangerous for me and not for him, I would. Don't do it. Maybe there's something we can do at some time. If there is a way, my father will do it." And Elder Thomas had to accept that. He had no other alternative. By the time the elders had finished packing and Sister Stoltz had brought in some cold cuts for them to eat, Peter showed up. He had hardly calmed down before Brother Stoltz came in. They all talked about the evacuation of the missionaries, about the possible war, about the change that would come to all their lives. "Bruder Thomas," Brother Stoltz said, "a long time ago I told you that we might end up enemies, and you said we never would." "We never will, Bruder Stoltz." "Yes, I believe that's so. You and I cannot be enemies. But America may follow the other countries into the war, and you missionaries returning home could become soldiers. Whether you like it or not, you could come back to this soil to shoot at us." "I couldn't do that." Elder Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up at Bruder Stoltz, who was standing by the kitchen door, but he couldn't look at him long. He knew he was making a promise that he may not be able to keep. "Have those SS men bothered Anna?" Elder Thomas was finally brave enough to ask. He looked at Brother Stoltz, unable to pose such a repugnant question to Anna herself. "We have been fortunate in that matter," Brother Stoltz said. "So far." "Bruder Stoltz, you need to be baptized. You may not be able to stop Hitler, but you can bring your family together. You can bring the priesthood into your home." Elder Thomas stood up so he could look directly at Brother Stoltz. Brother Stoltz was still wearing his suit from work, the only suit Elder Thomas had ever seen him in. He looked down, rubbed his hands together, and he didn't say no. "Anna tells me that you go to the branch meetings," Elder Thomas said, "and you like them." "Yes, that's true. I like the hope it offers." "Do you pray?" "Yes, I do that." Elder Thomas was not surprised but pleased, and he liked Brother Stoltz's tone of voice. "What do you feel when you pray?" "I like to pray. I enjoy the thought that there is a God, and that He cares about us, even in all this disorder. At some time you have to listen to the Spirit. Accept it, not discount it every time you feel it." Again Brother Stoltz looked toward the floor, and he rubbed his hands together. "I made a little test for the Lord," he said. "It's not the right thing to do, I suppose, but I did it." "What test?" "Last night I talked to Bruder Mize. He told me that the missionaries were leaving. I knew how much my family wanted to see you, and so I asked the Lord to send you here." "Heinrich, you didn't tell me that," Sister Stoltz said. "I know. Why was that a test?" Elder Thomas asked. "I told the Lord, send him here if you care about us." "We didn't plan to come this way," said Elder Thomas. "But it was the only city we could get tickets for. And we couldn't get a train for the Netherlands until tomorrow. So maybe God made it happen. It's possible." "Oh, Heinrich, you ask and you receive, and even then you doubt." Sister Stoltz walked to him, took hold of his arm. "But how does one know? What if the elders hadn't come? Would it mean there is no God? It's all so difficult to know." "Bruder Stoltz, We are here. I wanted to come. I think you should be baptized now, tonight, before we go." Brother Stoltz's head came up, and those intense blue eyes like his daughter's filled with tears. "That's what I told the Lord. I said, 'Send Bruder Thomas.' I'll take that as a reason to commit myself. I'll be baptized." "Then you will, Heinrich?" Brother Stoltz looked at Anna and then at Peter across the room, and then he turned and took his wife in his arms. "Ja, ich bin bereit. I am ready." Elder Thomas could hardly believe he was hearing this. "But let's do it quickly. If I think very long, I'll change my mind. I feel something very strong right now, but I'll question it soon. I know I will." Elder Thomas stood. "I'll go find Bruder Mize, and I'll check at the bathhouse. I don't see any reason we can't do it tonight." "It's good," Bruder Stoltz said. Chapter 16. At the baptismal service, Elder Thomas promised the saints of the Frankfurt branch that he would never be their enemy, no matter what the future brought. Then Elder Taylor baptized Brother Stoltz, and Elder Thomas confirmed him. Then, following the approving vote of the branch members, President Mize ordained Brother Stoltz an elder, and a member of the district presidency set him apart as a member of the branch presidency. It was a momentous step for Brother Stoltz, but President Mize needed him. Difficult days lay ahead. Afterwards, Elder Thomas was watching as the members congratulated Brother Stoltz. He felt a touch on his arm and looked to see Anna next to him. "I must say something to you," she whispered. The two were not far from the others, but the rumble of the echoing voices was loud in the tiled room. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for what you have done for my family." He turned toward her, but he stepped back just a little. "Believe me, Anna, this has been my pleasure." He knew he sounded overly proper, but he also knew it was the only way he should talk to her. "I'm afraid I won't see you again," she whispered. "We can always remember each other," he said, and instantly he hated the words. She was looking up at him, those huge eyes swimming in tears. "Anna, you're young," Elder Thomas said, but he didn't dare add to that. "I'm not a child. I know what I feel." Elder Thomas had to end this. "Anna, I'll pray for you," he said, trying to sound like a missionary. "I'll always remember you and your family. I hope you'll all be kept safe. Will you write to me?" Yes, I will." And he knew that once he was released, he could be more open with her. But if war comes, letters might not get through. "I know, but let's try. Do you want to write to me?" "Yes, certainly." But that was all he said. It was on the train the next morning that he missed her so deeply that he wished he had said everything, mission rules or not. He wished that he had begged her to wait for him and that he had promised to return to Germany as soon as he could. There were so many things he didn't know about her, so many hours he wanted to spend with her, and now she was just gone. When the train began to slow, he knew it was arriving in Cologne, Köln in German. Here the elders had to change trains. They grabbed their suitcases from an overhead shelf, and they worked their way through the crowded car, out onto the platform, and then into the station. There they found a board with all the trains listed. "Track number 4, Elder Thomas told his companion. "The schedule means nothing," a man said to him in English. Elder Thomas nodded. "Dankeschön," he said, but he pushed ahead anyway. They had to try. The station was suffocating, hot and humid, and the smell of the people was almost intolerable. Elder Thomas wanted to strip off his suit coat, but it would be one more thing to carry. When he got to the gate, he reached into his pocket for his ticket. A railroad official, however, was already shaking his head. "We have tickets for Holland," Elder Thomas told him, "through Nijmegen." "That train is cancelled," the man said. "It's going to Poland. The border is closed anyway. No one can go through." "What can we do?" The official cocked his head to the side and shrugged his shoulders. "Move back, please." Elder Thomas tried to think what to do. "If we can get to the border," he told Elder Taylor, "maybe we could convince the guards that we should be allowed to pass through, since we're foreigners. But we have to get there first." He pushed his way toward a ticket booth, and then he got in a long line. But when he finally got to the booth, the man inside the cage was no more helpful than the man at the gate had been. "Maybe some trains will go that direction, I can't say, but you won't get across. You should try to get to Belgium, perhaps, or maybe Denmark." "Could we trade in our tickets for others?" No, I'm sorry, that's not possible." "But the train is cancelled. We should get our money back." "We can't do that, I'm sorry. You must step aside." "We have no money. We have no way to get out of Germany." "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Please step aside." So Elder Thomas stepped away from the booth. "Maybe we can call President Wood," Elder Taylor said. Maybe, but the phones are jammed. I doubt we could get through to him. All the same, they tried. They waited in another line until they got to a telephone booth, and they placed their call. But the operator told Elder Thomas, "The call will not go through," and the line went dead. Elder Thomas stepped out of the sweltering booth, and for a moment the air of the train station felt almost cool. He took a long breath and then said, "We'll just have to keep trying." And so every hour or so after that they tried to call the mission office, but they still couldn't get through. They spent some of their time outside where they only had heat to deal with, not the sauna-like closeness, and not the ubiquitous body odor. When night came, the crowd diminished, but the calls would still not go through. The elders finally found a place in a corner, stretched out as much as possible, and laid their heads on their rolled-up suit coats. Toward morning, Elder Thomas finally drifted off into a shallow state of sleep, but he didn't sleep long. He was sitting up, leaning against a wall, feeling almost dazed when Elder Taylor said, "Did you hear that?" Elder Thomas listened intently. Someone was whistling on the other side of the station. It was hard to tell, but he thought he recognized the tune. "Do what is right," Elder Taylor said, and suddenly both elders were grabbing for their suitcases. "Over there on that baggage cart," Elder Thomas said, and at the same moment he thought he recognized the missionary, but it was too good to be true. "Come on!" A big guy in a dark suit had crawled up on top of the baggage cart and was whistling for all he was worth. Halfway there, Elder Thomas finally knew for sure. "It's Elder Meekum, my old companion," he said. "I hope he's got some money." Elder Thomas was thinking the same thing. As the elders neared the baggage cart, Elder Thomas began to wave, and he saw Elder Meekum grin. "Hey, Elder Thomas," he said, looking delighted. "I'm glad you recognize my song. I can't carry a tune in a bushel basket." It sounded like a chorus of angels, if you ask me. Elder Meekum waved his elbows, pretending they were wings. "That's me, Angel Lewis." And then he pointed. "Look, another pair of elders and two sisters with them." As it turned out, these four had only been in the station a short time, having gotten in during the early morning hours. But an older couple also appeared, and they had been stuck in the station even longer than Elder Thomas and Elder Taylor. Elder Thomas knew Elder Norbert and Elder Peterson quite well. Sister Edwards and Sister Price, along with the couple, Elder and Sister Fortner, he had met at district conferences. Elder Meekum had gotten down from the baggage cart by the time the missionaries collected in a little group. Everyone was shaking hands, but still looking rather serious until Elder Meekum said, "I've got tickets, and plenty of money." "Did President Wood send you?" Sister Price asked. "Yeah, I got into Frankfurt last night and stopped at the mission office. The president had gotten word about the border being closed, so he had me buy tickets for Amsterdam and for Copenhagen, and he gave me 500 marks. Then he sent me out looking for missionaries. I'm glad to find 8 in one place, but I still have 23 to locate." "What did he say for us to do?" Elder Norbert asked. "He thought you could still get through the border if you had tickets on to London. Joseph Fielding Smith was with President Wood in Hanover when all this started. Elder Smith and his wife got out that way, and they're in Amsterdam. But I'm not sure that will work now. You might want to try it since it's close, and then if that doesn't work, head for Copenhagen. I'll give you enough money to buy more tickets if you have to." Elder Meekum reached inside his suit coat and pulled out his billfold. He was pulling out bills when a loud voice sounded. "Was machen Sie da?" The whole group turned at the same time. A policeman had come around the baggage cart. He stepped up close to Elder Meekum. "Nothing," Elder Meekum said. "I was just trying to find my friends." "You shouldn't be getting up there like that." "I'm sorry, I won't do it again," he laughed. "Have you papers?" "Yes, of course." The policeman was a slim man with a strong jaw and short, well-trimmed hair. He studied the papers thoroughly but briskly, and then he handed them back to Elder Meekum. "Are you leaving Germany?" he asked. "Yes." "I see you have money. You cannot take that with you. Give it to me." "It's for my friends. We're all missionaries. We have to buy tickets to Denmark." "I told you give me that money." The policeman stepped closer and held out his hand. His eyes were still as stones. Elder Meekum, who was much bigger than the policeman, held his ground, the billfold still in his hand and tucked against his chest. "I can't give it to you," he said. "I promised to get all our missionaries out of Germany, and we need this money to buy train tickets. I will decide that. Give me the money." He stepped closer and extended his hand again. "No." "Come with me, then," the policeman said. "Where?" "To the police station." "No, I can't do that. I need to stay here." The policeman had stepped away, expecting Elder Meekum to follow him. Now he stepped back. "Have you gone mad? I am arresting you. You must come with me." "I can't. I won't go." The two stood absolutely still, staring into each other's eyes. Elder Thomas felt as though his heart had stopped. "I told you to come with me, instantly." Elder Meekum seemed to think things over this time. Several seconds went by before he said firmly but quietly, "No, I'm staying right here. Chapter 17. The policeman began to scan the crowd, obviously looking for other officers. But surprisingly, it was Elder Meekum who pointed off toward a station exit. "I won't leave the station, but I am willing to talk to those military policemen over there." Elder Thomas couldn't think what Elder Meekum was doing, but the policeman jumped at the chance to get the big elder over to other authorities. "Yes," he said, "we will go to them." Elder Meekum set out, the policeman following, and the other missionaries trailing along in single file. Elder Meekum made his way to the officers and then said, "I'm an American missionary. I'm trying to leave Germany." Then he explained about the money he was carrying. Elder Thomas was amazed by Elder Meekum's improved German, but even more by the authority in his voice. He and the others stayed back and let Elder Meekum handle this himself. "This man wants to take my money," Elder Meekum said, "and that's not right. I'll give up any money I have left when I reach the border, but he has no right to take it from me now." The two German military policemen listened, but their faces, their steady eyes, revealed no reaction. The taller of the two, who looked to be a match for Elder Meekum, said, "We will decide what is right. That's not for you to say." "I told him he was under arrest," the local policeman said, "but he refused to go with me." "You resisted arrest?" the big officer asked. "I made a promise. I have to help my friends, and this man wanted to steal my money from me. I couldn't let him do that." "What do you mean, steal?" the local policeman demanded. He took hold of Elder Meekum's arm. "You will be very sorry you said this. Come with me to the station now." But no one moved. Elder Meekum looked at the big officer and said, "This is wrong. You know it is. We have a right to leave your country. I have a right to help my friends." "Enough talk," the local officer said. "Help me take him." The two military officers glanced at each other, as though to measure the other's response. And then the bigger man asked, "What were you going to do with this man's money?" The policeman let go of Elder Meekum's arm and faced the officer squarely. "You have no right to question my honesty," he said. But the officer said, "I do question it. I trust this man's honor more than yours. Leave now. I'll handle this matter." "You have no authority over me. I'm taking authority. What are you going to do about it?" The policeman stood his ground for a time, and then he said, "You have not heard the last from me," and he walked away. But he sounded defeated. "Just a moment," the military policeman said to Elder Meekum. He walked to a desk near the exit. He picked up a pen, dipped it in a bottle of ink, and wrote something on a sheet of paper, and then he brought the note to Elder Meekum. "This may help you if someone else stops you, but I can't guarantee it. You must leave the country as soon as possible." Elder Meekum thanked him, and then he walked to the other missionaries. "That was amazing," Elder Peterson said. "Not really," Elder Meekum said. "Germans believe in honor." "Maybe so," Elder Thomas said. "But how did you know to talk to these army guys? I thought you were getting yourself into a bigger mess." "I don't know why I did that. I said it before I thought about it, and as soon as I did, I thought I'd made a mistake." "The Lord is looking out for us," old Brother Fortner said. Elder Thomas felt a chill go through him, and he felt sure that Elder Fortner was right. He finally thought to close his eyes for a few seconds and say a prayer of thanks. "Look, I need to keep going," Elder Meekum said. "I can't tell you exactly what to do. You'll have to take whatever trains you can catch. I hope the conductors will honor these tickets." He looked at the Fortners. "The Dutch might be stricter about letting the young missionaries through, but maybe you can make it the way Elder Smith and his wife did." Yes, Sister Fortner said. "We must try this. We can't make it the other way." Elder Thomas hated to think what might happen to them if they didn't get across the border, but he thought the Lord would help somehow. Everyone talked things over after that. Elder Thomas agreed to go with Elder Meekum to find the stranded missionaries. Elder Taylor decided to leave with the others for the border and then to head north to Denmark if that didn't work. And so everyone went together for the moment to see whether they could catch the train to Bentheim on the Dutch border. The man at the gate said the train was going to be late. Everyone else decided to wait, but Elder Meekum and Elder Thomas found a train heading to Oberhausen, a closer town, and they got on. The train was slow in getting started, but when it pulled out of the station, the elders knew they were moving toward the area where some of the missionaries might be, which was better than waiting in Köln for a train that might not come for another hour. The plan was to get off in the first border town and then to work their way north. But as the train was pulling into a town a few kilometers distant from the border, Elder Meekum suddenly stooped and looked out the window. "Let's see," he said. "I'm thinking maybe we better get off here and take a look. I doubt anyone would... Come on, I think we better. Should we leave our baggage on board?" No. The train won't be stopped long. He reached up and grabbed his own bag, nothing more than a satchel, and then pulled down Elder Thomas's bigger suitcase. Elder Thomas caught up quickly and took his suitcase from Elder Meekum, who walked into the little one-room station and looked around. A few people were sitting on the benches inside, but certainly none were missionaries. A man just inside the door asked, "What can I do for you? Have you seen any Americans?" "Not that I know of." "Let's get back on the train before it pulls out," Elder Thomas said. "We don't want to get stuck here." "Well, just a minute." Elder Meekum walked on through the station, stepped outside, and scanned the area. "When we were on the train," he said, "I got this really strong feeling that we ought to stop here, and now I don't know why. Maybe it was just, a mistake." Elder Meekum didn't answer. He was still looking at the street that led away from the train station. "We'd better get back on the train, Elder." Elder Meekum stood for a moment. "Maybe so," he said quietly. But then he took a step forward. "No, we need to take a look around here." Look around? Elder Thomas couldn't believe this. There was nothing to look around at. The town was a tiny village. Elder Meekum picked up both bags again, and he marched away, taking those long steps that Elder Thomas remembered all too well. "Where are you going?" "I'm not sure. I just feel like I need to keep looking." Elder Thomas was losing patience. He believed in the spirit, but this was sounding downright silly. The elders came to a Gast house. "Let's take a peek in here," Elder Meekum said. The two stepped into the little restaurant, which was filled with long tables, most of them empty. Elder Thomas took a quick glance and was about to turn when he came to a stop. Two men were sitting at a nearby table, wearing suits. Elder Meekum burst into laughter. "Hey, elders," he said. The missionaries looked up, one twisting in his seat. Both were wide-eyed, but in another second they were scrambling out of their seats and heading toward Elder Meekum. "How did you know we were here?" one of them was asking. "I didn't know. You were just lucky the Lord knew. You did your best to hide from him." Everyone shook hands. Elder Thomas was somewhat acquainted with one of them, Elder Thompson. The other said his name was Elder Maw. "How did you end up here?" Elder Meekum asked. Elder Thompson was a tidy young man normally, but he hadn't shaved for a couple of days and his tie was hanging loose. "We got to Bentheim and they wouldn't let us through, so we got on a train without tickets, just hoping no one would notice. But a conductor kicked us off here. We just spent our last few pfennigs to buy some apple juice. We didn't know what we were going to do after that." "I never would have gotten off the train," Elder Thomas said. "It was all Elder Meekum. It's a miracle we found you." A long silence followed, and Elder Thomas saw the awe in both elders' eyes. "We've been praying a lot," Elder Thompson finally said. His eyes had filled with tears. Elder Meekum took his billfold out. "I'm going to give you money for tickets," he said, "but I don't know how to tell you to get to Denmark. You'll have to follow your own inspiration." And so the elders walked back to the train station, and Elders Thompson and Maw got tickets on a train to Hanover. Elder Meekum and Elder Thomas waited until the next train came through, and then they departed for the border. They found 4 more missionaries in one little border town, this time in the train station, and then when they reached Bentheim, they walked off the train and immediately spotted a whole group of elders. "Elder Thomas," one of them called, an elder named Sanders, who had come over on the boat to Germany with Elder Thomas. Elder Meekum walked ahead. "I have money," he said. "President Woods sent me to find you." "Well, we're okay," Elder Thomas said. "We have tickets." "Where did you get the money?" All the elders laughed. They were a tired-looking group, all with unshaven faces and wrinkled suits. "It's a long story," Elder Sanders said. "We got across the border to Oldenzaal, but the Dutch border guards stopped us and told us we couldn't enter the country. So we called the mission office in Amsterdam, and the mission president told us he would send someone with money. But we got sent back across the border before anyone could reach us." Elder Sanders put his arm on another missionary's shoulder. Elder Thomas didn't recognize him. "This is Elder Kest," Elder Sanders said. "He came from Amsterdam. He's leaving in a few minutes to head back. He managed to get into Germany without a visa, which was an absolute miracle." Elder Thomas could see very well what was happening. The Lord was looking out for the missionaries. Elder Meekum gave the elders some extra cash in case they had to buy other tickets, and then the whole group walked outside, knelt, and prayed together. They offered their thanks and then asked for the miracles that would still be needed if they were to make it out of the country. Elder Meekum and Elder Thomas considered all the possible routes that missionaries might have taken to the border, and where the two of them might look for the ones they had still not located. They decided they would have to head south again, retrace their steps, and check the towns further from the border. For another day and night they kept searching, but they found no one. They had to assume that the others had found a way out, and now it was time to try to make it out of the country themselves. As it turned out, the next 24 hours were the worst of all. The elders had slept very little the night before, catching winks on trains when they could get a seat and lying on a train station floor for a few hours, but now they found that the trains heading toward Hamburg or anywhere north were being taken over by troops. At every station they were warned not to board, that they might get to the next train station, but then they would be booted off and would end up stranded. But they got on trains that were heading somewhat in the direction they needed to go, and they kept working their way closer to Denmark. 3 different times they seemed trapped, with no way to continue north nor to return to their last city. But each time they managed to find another train. When they reached Schleswig, they knew they couldn't be more than 30 or 40 kilometers away from Denmark, but it was early in the morning and the elders hadn't had any real sleep for 3 days. In Schleswig, an official came through the car announcing that the train would travel no further north. Everyone must get off. So the elders climbed off the train, again very worried. But they saw people jumping off the platform and running across the tracks to the train across from them. Someone shouted, "It's going to the border! It's leaving now!" The elders bolted after the others. They jumped off the platform, ran across the tracks, and then climbed up the other side. They were about to head for the nearest car when a man yelled, "You two, stop!" Elder Thomas took a couple of steps toward the train, but a policeman was running toward them. "Stop! You can't do that!" Just then Elder Thomas saw the departing train jerk and begin to roll forward. "We must catch that train," Elder Thomas told the policeman. He took another step in that direction. "No, you have broken the law. Where are you from?" "America." Elder Thomas looked at the train rolling a little faster now. He couldn't think what to do. "Look how many are crossing!" Elder Meekham shouted at the man above the noise. Several more people were down on the tracks, and some were just climbing up on the platform. The policeman shouted, "No, you must not do that." He turned back to the elders. "Stay here. You are under arrest." Then he ran along the platform, yelling for everyone to stop. "Come on," Elder Meekham yelled to Elder Thomas, and he reached down and grabbed both suitcases. He took off after the train, running hard. Elder Thomas was almost sure they were making a mistake, but he took off after Elder Meekham. "Stop, you men, stop!" the policeman was shouting. But Elder Meekham kept running, and Elder Thomas was not about to stop and go back alone. The only trouble was the train was picking up speed. Elder Thomas could see what he had to do. He sprinted past Elder Meekham, gained some quick ground on the caboose, and then leaped onto the steps. "Forget the bags," he yelled to Elder Meekham. He reached his hand out for him. But Elder Meekham had drawn even now, and he tossed Elder Thomas's suitcase to him. Elder Thomas shoved it behind him and then caught Elder Meekham's little bag. In the effort, however, Elder Meekham had lost some ground on the train. He put on a burst of speed, all he had, and leaped. He got a foot on the bottom step, and Elder Thomas grabbed him by the arm, but the big guy was dangling, unable to reach the handrail with his other hand. Elder Thomas was clinging with everything he had, but he could feel Elder Meekham slipping from his hold. And then another hand reached over Elder Thomas's shoulder and caught Elder Meekham by his suit coat. A big tug shifted Elder Meekham's weight forward, and he was able to swing himself around and catch hold of the handrail. He was on. Elder Thomas took one last look and saw the policeman waving a fist, his mouth wide open, yelling some last curse at them. But they were on the train, heading toward the border, and it was the conductor himself who had pulled Elder Meekham on board. "I should have let you fall," he muttered. "You should not do that." But his gruffness seemed to take some effort. The elder stepped inside the caboose and shut the door. "We have to get to the border," Elder Thomas said. "Yes, of course, I understand that." "We have money, but no ticket." "Everything is crazy," the conductor said. "People are getting on any train they can. No one has proper tickets." He turned and walked away. The elders were still trying to catch their breaths. "I was about to slip off," Elder Meekham said, but he was laughing. "If I'd landed back on the platform, that cop would have had me." "I doubt that. You would have fallen on the tracks and broken your head wide open." "Ah, no, my head's too hard for that." He grinned, and then he said, "Let's go see if there's a seat somewhere in this train. I'm a little tired." The train, as it turned out, was not crowded. Troops were heading south from this part of Germany, and most people who were fleeing the country had apparently already made their way out. The two missionaries sat down, and Elder Thomas took some more deep breaths. They were going to make it, he told himself. "I hope everyone else got out," Elder Meekham said, and that, of course, was the last worry. The train stopped at a couple of little towns after that, and it stayed longer than seemed necessary. But finally, about mid-morning, it chugged to a stop at the border. And once again, everyone was told to get off the train. The elders lined up at a little guard station and waited for their turn to be processed. Elder Thomas couldn't believe the relief he felt. As they were waiting, however, a guard walked along the line, looking at everyone. When he reached the elders, he stopped. "Americans?" he asked. "Yes. Come with me." Elder Thomas couldn't think why they would be singled out. Most of the people in the line were foreigners. But the elders were marched into a station and into an office. There they faced an older, balding man who looked up at them through thick glasses. "You two were arrested in Schleswig, and you ran from the police. Did you think you could get away with that?" Elder Thomas tried to think what to tell the man, but he didn't think excuses were going to impress him. "You broke the law. For that you must be punished." "We just want to leave Germany before the war breaks out," Elder Meekum said. "We're missionaries. I'll let others decide what you are. I only enforce the law." He stood up and called for the guard. "We have this," Elder Meekum said. He pulled out the letter that the military policeman had written for him in Köln. The man read it carefully and then said, "This means nothing. This officer simply accepted the story you told him." He looked at the guard. "Call the police. Have them come for these men." "Wait a minute," Elder Meekum said. "We're not liars. We are missionaries. We crossed some railroad tracks with a lot of other people, but that's the only thing we did wrong." "That's why you were arrested?" "Yes." "And nothing else?" "Nothing else." The man stared at Elder Meekum for several seconds, seemed to test the idea whether he believed it, and then he said, "Go, cross the border. You're only making my day more difficult." He handed back the papers, and the elders left. They waited in line again, gave up most of their remaining cash, allowed the guards to check their passports, and then, suddenly, it was all over. They walked across the border and into Denmark. On the Danish side, they were stopped and checked again, but by then they could see, standing not far away, President Wood with 2 other missionaries. The 3 of them were beaming. As soon as the elders passed on through, they hurried to President Wood, who grabbed one of them in each arm. "You're the last," he said. "Everyone is out now." "All 31? We couldn't find some of them." "They all got out. Some got through the border before it closed." "What about the Fortners?" "They're safe in Amsterdam. The guards let them go through." Elder Thomas and Elder Meekum turned and threw their arms around each other. "The Lord did it, Mitt," Elder Meekum said. Elder Thomas began to say a silent prayer. Chapter 18. Elder Joseph Fielding Smith had managed to find a flight, and he and his wife Jessie had arrived from Amsterdam in Copenhagen. Elder Smith had overseen the arrival of the missionaries, and now he was working to make arrangements for them to sail back to America. It was a strange time for the missionaries. After all the excitement and anxiety of the evacuation, suddenly they were living like vacationers. Each morning they met with Elder Smith at the branch house, and he led them in discussions. But after the class, they were free to wander through Copenhagen, take pictures, and visit tourist sites. It would have been very pleasant if the missionaries hadn't been hearing the news. German forces were destroying Poland in spite of some limited help by the French. Warsaw was under siege, the artillery fire constant and the people in terror. It was only a matter of days until Poland would fall, and now Russia had marched in from the north, ready to grab up its share of the spoils. This was apparently the deal Hitler had made with Stalin. The great question was what would come next. Would Hitler attack France? Or would the French army move across the Maginot Line and try to stop Hitler, maybe with the help of the Royal Air Force? All of Europe was blacked out at night, and everywhere civilians were expecting bombs to begin falling. But the bombs were still not falling, and the missionaries were thrilled to have time each day with Elder Smith. Elder Thomas had known him for as long as he could remember, but he still knew what an opportunity he now had. One day after class, Elder Smith told Elder Thomas, "It looks like we're sending you home. You don't have 6 months left on your mission, do you?" "No, only about—" "Well, then you'll be going home. It isn't worth sending you off to Nebraska or Kentucky or somewhere and just let you get settled in a little before we ship you home." Elder Thomas hardly knew how to react. Suddenly his mission was over, and he hadn't had a chance to complete the full term. Something about it felt incomplete. "Let me tell you one more thing," Elder Smith said. "You have the ability and the heritage to become a great man in the church. Don't strive for it, but do your duty. Serve with all your heart, and the Lord will use you. I feel that in you." He nodded, seemingly to seal the promise, and then he walked away. During the rest of Elder Thomas's stay in Copenhagen, he thought of these words constantly, wondering what his destiny would be back in Utah. After about 3 weeks, the missionaries were divided into 2 groups and shipped out. Elder Thomas and Elder Meekum made certain they ended up on the same ship. They sailed on the Mormachok, a freight ship that had been set up with cots down in the hold to handle passengers. Another part of the hold was inhabited by cattle, with all their pungent smells. The passage, especially in the beginning, was rough, and most of the missionaries spent many hours leaning over the rail outside or lying in their bunks in that stinking hold. The only baths the missionaries could take were cold saltwater showers, and the food was terrible. After a few days, however, the weather improved, and the rest of the trip, another week or so, went much better. The missionaries gathered in groups each day, and they continued the gospel study that Elder Smith had started. It was toward the end of the voyage one night that Elder Thomas and Elder Meekum sat up late, talking and looking at the stars. It was a cool night in early October, and they shivered a little, but the sky was enormous, and the stars were clear. It was too good to pass up after all the cloudy days they had seen at sea. So the two of them lay flat on their backs on the deck and looked at the sky. They talked about their futures, and Elder Meekum said he was going to take college more seriously this time around. He wanted to settle into a major and find something he could build a career on. "I'm thinking about forestry," he told Elder Thomas. "They have a forestry school at the AC, and I like the idea of working outside." "I think that's a good choice," Elder Thomas said. "I can see you doing something like that." "So what are you going to do? Do you still want to study history?" "I think so. I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. I have an uncle who's a history professor, and I've always loved to talk to him. Yeah, you'd be a good professor, too. It's hard to think of you doing anything else. Of course, maybe we'll all be soldiers." Neither spoke for a time after that. Elder Thomas looked at the stars and imagined them falling from the heavens. So many calamities were coming, but he had never thought until lately that those wars and rumors of wars would involve him. "I pray every night that I won't ever have to fight Germans," Elder Meekum finally said. "Me too." The two lay there, the universe stretched out overhead. Elder Thomas was always awed by the idea that God could see and understand so much. In the presence of such vastness, it seemed rather selfish to bother him now with personal concerns. But Elder Thomas began to pray, not about the war or the German saints this time, but about a small matter, a young woman he wanted kept safe. He closed his eyes to shut out the stars for a moment, and he tried to see her face, but the image wouldn't come. What he saw instead was a parade, tanks resounding on cobblestone streets, goose-stepping soldiers, trucks, artillery, blood-red Nazi flags. When he opened his eyes, it was hard for him not to think of the universe as something cold and immovable. And so he shut his eyes again and tried to picture God, his Father, someone who cared, and he prayed for a miracle. He asked that Anna might be protected, that he might see her again, that he might have the chance to ask her to marry him. And there, out under the stars, suddenly a tremendous warmth and calm filled him, the same power he had felt at the moment he had placed his hands on Anna's head to bless her. He was sure he had his answer. She was the one he was supposed to marry, the one he would marry. Chapter 19. The door was open part way, so Bobby stuck her head in and said, "David?" Professor Stinson rotated in his chair and then stood up. He looked elated. "Bobby, I was hoping you would come by." Fall term finals were over, and David was reading tests. He had on a sports shirt and a white V-neck tennis sweater. "I turned in my last paper, so I'm finished, but I wanted to bring you this." Bobby was holding a gift wrapped in red and green Christmas paper. "Bobby, you don't have to bribe me. I already gave you an A." He smiled and reached for the package. "Oh, I'll keep it then." She pulled it back, but he stepped closer and took it away from her. Bobby had completed her second class with Professor Stinson, whom she now called David at times, but only when no one else was around. The two had talked many times during the term. The conversations usually started with Bobby's questions about the Puritans or Emily Dickinson or whatever she was studying at the time. But they had a way of continuing down the hallway and into David's office. And then, more often than not, the talk turned to other matters, and at some point Bobby had begun to express her frustration with Phil. She and Phil had agreed on a wedding date, but she had managed to put it off to June 16th, at the end of her junior year. That had seemed a long way off in the fall, but now, with Christmas near, it was beginning to seem close. David tore off the wrapping paper and looked at the gift, a book. "Oh, my," he said, and then he opened the cover and looked through the first few pages. "Bobby, I don't believe this. It must have cost you a fortune." "Not really. Mr. Weller made me a good deal. But it's a first edition." "I know." Bobby had not intended to buy him a Christmas present, but she had been downtown in Weller's bookstore, and she had looked through the used books. When she had come across this handsome edition of Henry James' The Ambassadors, she couldn't resist buying it for him. "This is wonderful. The binding is beautiful. I'm glad you like it. I thought you would. You knew I would." He looked at her for a moment, smiling a little, but those green eyes of his looked serious, intense. "Bobby, I don't think in all my life anyone has known me so well. I've told you things I've never told anyone." It was time to go. This sort of thing was happening too often lately. Bobby was never so happy as when she could spend time with him, and never so miserable. "I've told you things I shouldn't have told anyone. I hope you keep my secrets." He nodded, smiling more now. She loved the way he studied her face, as though he were trying to discover any hint of what she was thinking. "I didn't get you anything. I thought about it, but I didn't know whether I should. David, I didn't expect us to exchange gifts. I just saw this and I wanted you to have it." He looked at the book again, turned it over in his hands. "I think the proper response is to give you a kiss." "Oh, I think not." But she didn't step back. She was confused about her relationship with David, and well aware that she was playing with fire. But she loved these moments when his attraction to her was so obvious. "There's another reason I should kiss you." "Oh, really?" "Yes, a sprig of mistletoe is hanging over your head, and you know what custom requires in that case." She began to look up, but he placed the palm of his hand on the top of her head. "Don't look. That implies that you don't believe me." "Oh, I would never suggest that." She smiled, knowing she was flirting, wanting the kiss at the same time that she was telling herself that she wasn't going to allow it. She loved the excitement when he stepped closer. In fact, she almost let it happen. But when he bent a little, she finally stepped back. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No, it's okay. I just need to go." "Could I maybe see you during the holidays?" "No, of course not." But the idea was wonderful to her, and she watched a subtle dimple form in his cheek when he sensed that he had a chance. "We need to talk," he said, and now he was trying to say things with his eyes, and she was suddenly nervous. "There's nothing to talk about, you know that. Bobby, you can't marry Phil. You know you can't." Bobby looked out the window, where the afternoon sun was angling across the snow. It was bright out there, and Bobby had felt good all day. She didn't want to think. She had only intended to surprise David with the gift and then go home, relieved that her last paper was in. "I know I've made Phil sound awful sometimes, but he's not so bad as you think. He couldn't be as bad as I think, because I think you'll hate him if you marry him." Bobby wanted to deny that, but she sometimes wondered whether that would be true. She looked back at David, whose eyes were still trained on hers. "I've got to go," she said again. "What about college? What would he say if you told him you wanted to stay on for graduate school?" "I don't know. He would think it wasn't necessary, but if I told him it was important to me, he might try to work something out. At least at some point in my life." "This is crazy, Bobby. He has no right to decide things like that for you." "You're the only person I know who feels that way." "You Mormons," he said, and Bobby could see his frustration. His shoulders lowered as the air seeped from his chest. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to intrude. It's your life, obviously." Bobby pulled the door open. "Well, I won't have a class with you next quarter, but I'm sure I'll see you." He walked over to her. "I have a problem, Bobby." "What problem?" "I'm in love with you, Bobby. You know that. I think about you all day, every day. I need to know. Do you feel something for me?" She shut the door. "Yes, you know I do, but—" "I know, don't say it. But, Bobby, I don't see how you can marry Phil." She nodded. "I have to decide about that soon." And that was the end. But David was stepping closer. Bobby knew she should put her hand out and stop him, but she wanted this. He took her in his arms and kissed her, and then held her close. "There must be a way, somehow," he said, his mouth by her ear. But already Bobby's wiser self was pushing itself back into control. "I just don't think so," she said, and she pulled away. "We need to talk more. Maybe if we left Utah, we could find a church that we could—" "No. You know I wouldn't do that." "All right, but—" "I shouldn't have come. I need to—" But then he had her in his arms, and they were kissing again. He slowly ran his fingers over her hair. She felt the tingling run along her neck, then spread all through her, but once again she pulled away. She was surprised when the first tears dropped onto her cheekbones. She hadn't known she was crying. "Bobby, I think I could be a Mormon, in my own way. There's so much about the church that appeals to me. Don't, David. You know that wouldn't work. Why not? Let's think about it. I'd be willing to study the church more, or, I don't know. Bobby, I don't want to lose you. Bobby was crying harder now. She wanted this, but she didn't trust it, and she knew she had to leave before she made promises she wouldn't be able to keep. I've got to go, she said again. Will you talk to me more about this? I don't know. Probably not. She opened the door and stepped out, and she hurried out of the building. Chapter 20. Christmas Day started out like all the others, except that Alex was back, and as always, had a way of becoming the center of things. He played with the little girls, and they fussed over him, sat on his lap, laughed with him, and when Alex asked who was going to win the Rose Bowl, Gene, who read every word in both newspapers' sports sections, gave Alex the whole rundown on why he figured Southern Cal would beat Tennessee. Wally couldn't help feeling a little jealous, but he was waiting for his special little pleasure in watching Mom and Dad open their presents from Beverly and LaRue. Mom had asked Wally to go Christmas shopping with the girls, and Wally had liked that. He had taken them downtown on the trolley, which they loved to ride. The city had been great, so busy that it was hard to walk along Main Street. Music was playing, people were waving and greeting each other. The street lamps were wrapped in red and white like candy canes, and high-arching evergreen bows were draped across the streets. Wally loved it, and he had fun with the girls. They spent most of their time in W.T. Grant's, the five-and-dime store. The girls looked at pot holders and fancy combs, screwdrivers and shoe polish brushes, everything. They walked up and down the aisles, picked up half the items in the store, it seemed, and all the while chattered about the many choices. Finally, the girls had settled on the right gifts. For Mom, they chose a little music box that Wally had to go halves on. It cost $1.29, and the girls together only had $1 to shop with. Wally also helped out on a 49-cent tie. It was an ugly thing, maroon with a flock of ducks flying south across it. But even after all that, it was Alex they wanted to be close to now, on Christmas Day. That was partly because Alex was gone a lot in the evenings, because he had gone to work for Dad. But Wally also knew that the girls got tired of Wally's teasing. Mom loved her music box and thanked the girls, as well as Wally, and Dad hated the tie but pretended he didn't, which was perfect. "Thank you for helping them, Wally," Dad said with an ironic smirk. "Don't give me the credit," he told his dad. "They picked it out by themselves." Beverly and LaRue were quick and proud to agree. The rest of the family took delight in that. After the gifts were opened, Mom marshaled the troops into the kitchen. While everyone was gathered around the table eating, Dad and Alex began to talk about the war. All the talk in the newspapers was about the phony war. Little fighting had actually taken place, except at sea. The Graf Spee, a German pocket battleship, had sunk a number of British freighters in the Atlantic, and then, recently, had taken a pounding itself and had had to be scuttled off the coast of Uruguay, near Montevideo. "Hitler's the one talking peace now," Dad told Alex. "Sure, he always gets what he wants, and then he tries to lie his way into a treaty. Everyone wants peace so badly they let him pull the wool over their eyes." "This world is a scary place right now," Dad said. "Russia has always talked so high and mighty about the glories of communism, and now that gangster Stalin is trying to take over Finland, like he can't stand to see Hitler have all the fun." "Look what Japan has done," Alex said. "The Japs think they have a right to lead Asia, whether Asia wants to be led or not." Wally had heard these kinds of conversations too many times before. He ate quickly, and then he said, "Dad, I have a present I want to take to Lorraine. I'll be back in 15 minutes. "No, Wally, don't run off. Let's hold our meeting right now, or you'll all be running this way and that, and we'll never get around to it." "I'll tell you what, Dad," Wally said. "I can give your Christmas talk quick. I know it by heart. We all do." Wally laughed, but no one else did, and Wally saw Bobby duck her head. Dad was staring at Wally, but he didn't look angry. He looked hurt. That was not at all what Wally had wanted. "Hey, I'm just kidding," he said. "It wouldn't be Christmas if you didn't give your talk." Everyone was silent and tense, and Wally didn't want that. He had really only meant to tease. But then Alex stepped in. "Wally, when I was in Germany, I would have given anything to be here for that little meeting we always have. There's nothing better in the world than to hear Dad read the Christmas story." "I know. I like that too. I was just joking." He looked at Dad. "I'm sorry, really." And that was that. But Alex had said the right thing, as always. And Dad, obviously still ruffled by Wally's comments, said very little at the meeting. Wally felt awful, and afterwards he tried once again to apologize. Dad was willing to accept that, but Wally still felt his coldness toward him. That afternoon, when dinner was over and the house was still full of family, Bobby pulled Alex into the kitchen and said, "Grab your coat. Let's get out of here for a while." "Where are we going?" "Just for a walk. I can't stand the chaos any longer." She hurried upstairs and got her coat and hat, and she met Alex at the front door. They slipped out before anyone could ask them where they were going. Outside, Alex took a long breath. He liked the briskness in the air. As usual, smoke was hanging over the valley, but the eastern sky above the mountains was bright and blue. He pulled his gloves from his coat pockets and put them on. As they walked, they talked about Bobby's classes at college and about her plans for the future. Bobby told Alex she would like to keep going to school, and admitted some of her irritation with Phil about wanting to control her decisions. "So what are you going to do, Alex?" Bobby finally asked. She pulled her stocking cap down over her ears. "I don't know. Dad's working me into a real trap." The two had come to a corner, and Bobby was about to cross the street, but Alex said, "We'd better just walk around the block. Mom and Dad are going to wonder where we've gone." "What do you mean by a trap?" "Well, this is all very hush-hush for right now, so don't say anything. But Dad knows this guy named Henry Rosen. He owns a machine shop that went broke during the Depression. But now millions of dollars are pumping into companies that manufacture armaments. Rosen wants to retool the shop and start bidding on jobs to build parts. Go after subcontracts for big companies. There are supposed to be all kinds of opportunities. But what does Dad have to do with it? Henry doesn't have enough money or good enough credit to get the operation going. I see where this is heading. Dad will keep the dealership going, and you'll see to his interests in the new company." "Exactly, except it's worse than that. He wants me to be a full partner. He doesn't think this Rosen guy is much of a manager, so he wants me to be in charge." "He's got a lot of trust in you, Alex." "I guess so, but if I get in on this deal, I'll spend my days building weapons. That's not something I want to devote my life to." "No, I wouldn't like that either." The two turned the corner and headed east up a little hill. Alex looked up at Mount Olympus, the mountain he had longed to see the whole time he had been in Germany. Now, with snow on the peak and the blue sky for a background, it was magnificent. "The thing is, these weapons will be used against Germany, and I promised the members I would never be their enemy." Bobby slowed and turned toward Alex. "You're also thinking about Anna, aren't you?" "Of course. You're in love with her, aren't you, Alex?" Alex kept walking. He finally found voice to say, "Bobby, I was a missionary. I didn't say anything to her, not directly. I saw that picture of her. She's beautiful. Actually, that's not a great picture. She's much prettier than that. Bobby, she's so beautiful, it hurts to look at her." "Wow. But it's not just that. She had that experience, the one I told you about, and it softened her. She's been close to God and back, and it's touched everything about her." "Oh, Alex," Bobby said, "I hope you two will end up together someday." She reached up and patted his shoulder. "Bobby, I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone else." "Oh, good," Bobby laughed. Her face was flushed, and Alex was reminded of how she had looked as a kid, bundled up, out in the cold all winter. She had never liked to be inside. "On the ship, coming home, I was out under the stars one night, and I prayed that I would be allowed to see Anna again. I got this powerful sensation that God had heard me and answered, that it would happen. Then it will happen. I keep hoping the war won't last long and I can get over there before too long. Do you know if she's getting your letters?" "No, I don't, and I've gotten no mail from her. But that doesn't mean she's not trying. We promised to write each other." "Alex, you've got to reach her somehow." "I know. I think about it all the time." For a time, no one said anything, and they came to the final turn and walked back down the hill. "I know this is hard, but I still envy you," Bobby said as they reached the house. "Why?" Alex asked. He stopped and tucked his hands into his coat pockets. "You know why. Because you have your answer, and I don't. Are you really that unsure about Phil?" Bobby looked away, but she said softly, "Yes, I guess I am." Chapter 21. Spring came slowly in 1940. The weather warmed for a few days at a time, but storms continued to return. The mountains were still white down to the foothills in early April. Many of the talks at General Conference were about the unstable conditions in the world. President George Albert Smith had traveled to California earlier in the year, and while there had had a stroke and was partly paralyzed. He was convalescing and hadn't been able to return in time for conference, but he sent a message to be read. The Thomases listened to the conference, and after each session, President Thomas waited for the news on KSL. Hitler was massing troops on the Western Front, and a major invasion of France or Belgium seemed near. But that week, on April 9th, German forces attacked Denmark and Norway, countries that had remained neutral. Denmark fell without a fight. Norway offered what resistance it could, with some British help, but Germany had its victory before the month was over. Alex hated all these reports. He wanted the war to end quickly, but he saw no sign that it would happen. He had continued to send letters to Anna and to other members in Frankfurt, hoping to hear something from someone, but he received no answers. Early in May, on a Friday night, Bobby and Phil went dancing with a group of friends. The gang, mostly Phil's friends, parked their cars downtown, and then they rode together on the open-air trolley to Salt Air on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. Woody Herman's Thundering Herd Band was making a guest appearance, and even though the dance floor was huge, the place was packed. It was a cool evening, but lovely, and Phil was always at his best when he was dancing. But Bobby had made up her mind now, and she had to tell him. She was nervous all evening, and finally she asked Phil if they could leave. By the time she and Phil had reached the car, Phil was asking, "Bobby, is something wrong?" "Well, yes," Bobby said. "I told you I have something I need to talk to you about." "Okay, fine." But he didn't seem all that concerned.